On today's NUFC Transfer Daily, we've got two formerly prominent targets back on the radar in surprising ways, and also news that Newcastle have rejected Leeds' bid for Sean Longstaff. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please do subscribe and hit like on this video if you haven't already. Thanks so much to everybody who's joined me again, and today we're going to be looking at Hugo Ekitike. You haven't time travelled back to 2022. Newcastle are apparently back in the race to sign the France striker, or at least that's exactly what Fabrizio Romano said yesterday, both on Twitter and on his YouTube channel. And I'm going to basically explain a little bit, give an educated guess as to why this rumour has surfaced at this particular time, because obviously there's a lot of connotations around his price. Newcastle do want a striker and do need a striker, and he would be a brilliant option as a foil for Alexander Isak. Given that he may be the second most wanted striker on the planet this summer, I think it is quite difficult to see how you get both of them together. And this is basically a little bit of insight into how these things work, because I think Newcastle have kept in touch with Hugo Ekitike's agents and kept in touch with his development, because they've done that with quite a few targets you've seen this summer and last summer. We talked about it so many times that Newcastle, once they get a target, they don't tend to let them go, and we've seen even players who they failed to sign before have gone elsewhere. João Pedro they went back in for this summer, and they've also had Marc Guehi, who we'll also incidentally talk about in a minute. James Trafford, Newcastle have wanted him for a year. That deal is still very much on, by the way. It's just taking a little bit of time to get to an agreement with Burnley, and as I said yesterday, Newcastle have to work pretty slowly. Now things are ramping up. Now it's July. I think Newcastle are taking things a little bit more seriously in terms of prioritising where their time goes in terms of the targets that they go for, and they've put, as mentioned yesterday, striker next on the list after Anthony Elanga is confirmed and through the door, which will be happening in the next day or two. I don't have any insight on when the announcement will come, but I don't foresee any issues with the deal. The medical went okay, and it just takes time to decide on when to announce these things for various different reasons. So I would imagine that happens possibly today, possibly tomorrow, but don't sweat whenever it does happen. So the Ekitike stuff is not a surprise when you think about the fact that Newcastle have long-term targets. They like to keep the tabs on players and see their development. When Newcastle were interested, he was at Reims. He was very young. He was very raw. He was sort of seen as a backup option to Callum Wilson at the time, in the first January, and then obviously a little bit in the summer as well. He went to PSG. An early suggestion of what could happen with Newcastle's transfer targets when they go up against bigger, richer clubs. And in Ekitike's mind, from being from France, PSG is the club that everybody wants to play for, especially of his generation. And he's been a little bit unlucky in some ways that he's missed the boat, because he went in the sort of Messi, Neymar, Mbappe era, and then now he'd probably be getting a lot more opportunities because of the club's shift in the way that it's worked. But he missed the boat there really, and had to go to Eintracht Frankfurt to restart his career. Lost a bit of crucial development time, so his move to Newcastle would have suited him a lot more. And I know there's a little bit of bitterness that developed between the fan base, Newcastle and Ekitike, because of the way that played out. But Newcastle have always been, I think, keen to track him and see where he would end up. And he went to Frankfurt, and it didn't instantly hit the ground running in his first 6 months on loan. Signed a contract last season, scored 19 goals, and became one of those players that looks really, really exciting. Now, I think the reality of where Newcastle are with this, I think, there's the possibility that we discussed about Fabrizio Romano and the sort of maybe the cynic in us wondering why he tweets certain things that he does and what the real meaning behind things are. But in terms of Newcastle's interest, I think it would go as far as a contingency plan if and when Alexander Isak departs. And that doesn't mean that he's going to depart this summer. They want to renew Isak's contract. Isak has not asked to leave. I don't think Isak will push to leave, even though Liverpool are interested. This summer he's got 3 years in his contract. I expect him to be at St James's Park next season. But will he sign a new contract? That's a different question. And Newcastle do have to have contingency plans, because one day it feels like Alexander Isak will leave Newcastle and they have to be able to react. And, we've seen on a smaller scale, clubs like Brighton, when they sell a big player and have that big profit in mind, they scout other options, and when their manager leaves, they have the next person in mind straight away so they can react. And that's exactly what I would put this in terms of Ekitike being an ideal Isak replacement in the world where Isak goes. But there's also possibilities that Liverpool are interested in Ekitike, so they could look at striking a deal for him instead of Isak. That's been long seen as the alternative option at Anfield. Chelsea have previously been linked with Ekitike as well, but it feels, even for them, unlikely after signing João Pedro and Liam Delap from under Newcastle's noses this summer. Manchester United are also possible, but the money is quite steep for them. It's steep for Newcastle as well. It's apparently £85 million that Eintracht Frankfurt are looking for, which is the conversion rate of his €100 million release clause. So that's why I think this is a non-starter for Newcastle. Does it mean it's fake news? Does it mean it's a false story? No, I think Newcastle do hold an interest in Hugo Ekitike as a potential contingency for Isak in the scenario where he does leave. There's staunch confidence that he'll stay Isak this summer, but if Liverpool come with a £150 million bid, crucially Isak makes it clear that he wants to go, then there's got to be a conversation, and that's when the Ekitike discussion comes to the fore. There's no suggestion that Newcastle are going to try and bid for him to get him in alongside Isak. I really think that that's unlikely for the reasons that we outlined yesterday. Newcastle have to be a bit creative with their second striker option. He can play out wide, Ekitike. He's got all the versatility. He's got brilliant control. He's fantastic finish. He's developed so much in Germany. He feels very much where Isak was when Newcastle signed him 3 years ago, in terms of being on the cusp of something, but so much more to give. That's very much what Newcastle are. When Newcastle go into the transfer market, that's the ideal sign. That's what they look for. That's what they got in Anthony Elanga. It's what they got in Isak all those years ago. It's what they got in Tonali and Bruno and Anthony Gordon as well. Those are the players that Newcastle look for. In a world where Newcastle have to replace Isak, Ekitike is arguably the perfect striker. As I say, he's very much in the same mould of player in terms of his abilities. His finishing is fantastic. He's really developed that, even though it was really strong at Rem as well. What this really shows in terms of Newcastle is the breadth of planning they've got in their recruitment strategy. Their recruitment strategy, despite there being a bit of a power vacuum at the top of the club at the moment, their recruitment and Eddie Howe's coaching has really sort of helped them through, and it's because of the detail that they go into when they find a player. It's not just a good player, it's how they would fit into Newcastle. It's all really well researched. It's all done with a great amount of detail and great amount of understanding, and that's why those players rarely drop off the radar even when they move to other clubs. Newcastle being interested in Hugo Ekitike is not news, really. If Newcastle were to lose Isak at any point when he's still available, Ekitike would be the first port of call for who they'd go for, having missed out on João Pedro, who was the other striker they were looking at before they signed Isak. But it stands to reason why Newcastle have previously gone again for João Pedro this summer and are keen to go for Hugo Ekitike in an eventuality where they had to consider replacing Alexander Isak. Again, I don't want that to be misconstrued. I'm not saying that Alexander Isak is going to go. I'm not saying that Alexander Isak is going to push to go. I'm not saying Newcastle would accept £150 million, but it would be silly of Newcastle to completely have no contingency plan for any of these things to happen, because that's just not the way that football works. Whether it's this summer, next summer, whenever, Alexander Isak is going to be a wanted man over the course of the next couple of years. And the fact that he hasn't signed a new contract will only fuel the fire for a longer time that he doesn't actually put pen to paper. So Ekitike being a target is not fake news. It's not back in 2022. This is a possibility. This is a contingency plan. This is just an insight, I think, into the way that Newcastle's recruitment strategy works. They have scenarios, they have eventualities, and a way to react to them all. So that would be certainly something that I would look at in the eventuality that Alexander Isak leaves, most likely next year, if Ekitike hasn't found a club this summer. That's quite difficult to see happening, though. I think if Isak's gone next summer, Ekitike will have gone somewhere else as well. Having said that, Liverpool are the most prominent interested club in Ekitike, apparently, as well. There are Saudi clubs as well and various other European clubs, but he wants to join an English club according to Romano. So perhaps one to watch in a certain eventuality, but don't panic on Isak. It doesn't mean anything. It's just what I'm trying to illustrate is the contingency plan is in place, and he would be, for me, the ideal option because he really feels like he's in the position that Isak was back in 2022. Next, we're going to talk about Marc Guehi. This one is really strange because, as I said yesterday, Newcastle are looking at a striker. The centre-back situation is not on ice or anything. It's just not next in the list. They're going to sort the striker, and I think they'll then return to the centre-back situation. We know Newcastle have had interest in Scalvini. Marc Guehi is a long-term target. Newcastle like him a lot, but the understanding that I had when I asked somebody a question about this last night is that Newcastle won't make a move because Crystal Palace's valuation is still too high. Around 45 to 50 million pounds is what they're asking for, which is not nearly enough of a drop-off for Newcastle to come to the table after what happened last summer. They were burned quite publicly and quite heavily by what happened. I think that they would have to be very much on terms that they could agree with for them to come back to the table. And interestingly, Liverpool have been sort of really intensely interested over the last few weeks, and he still hasn't ended up there. Lots to talk about the lack of first-team football opportunities at Anfield, which may cause Guehi to look elsewhere or stay at Crystal Palace for a year and maybe go next summer when Ibrahima Konate leaves for free and then he comes in on a free. That's possible. But also Liverpool maybe don't want to pay the same money that Crystal Palace are asking as well. And this seems to be something, again, that no club is really prepared to get involved in. Crystal Palace are well within their rights if they are willing to lose him for free next summer, just as they were last year, to put the price on him. They've been vindicated by this because they won the FA Cup last year. He's been phenomenal for them. He would certainly improve Newcastle in so many ways, I think, and Liverpool as well, for that matter. He's a very, very good defender, but in the climate Newcastle have, having just spent 55 million on Elanga, they need a new centre-back, they need a new striker, which may well cost them around 30-35 perhaps, and James Trafford is the deal that they also want to do. It doesn't feel like £50 million for Marc Guehi is very feasible at the moment. Guehi would be one that Newcastle would absolutely go back in for if the valuation was right, but that's why they've moved on to other players like Scalvini, who incidentally they've got very similar answer from Atalanta on in terms of availability. We'll see how that one plays out. And a few other options as well. If the price comes down, I would imagine Newcastle would definitely be keen to do that deal. And finally, we quite interestingly seen that Sean Longstaff, the deal is off at the moment for him to go to Leeds because Newcastle rejected that bid, which is a surprise to me. I didn't have any insight on this, but I thought this would happen. I thought that Newcastle had... That fee's probably about fair because he's not been playing recently. I think he is probably about a £20 million player with a strong contract and when he's playing every week. But the fact that he's fifth choice for Newcastle now, 1 year in his deal, this is the last opportunity to get money for him. 12 million felt about right, and I was surprised to see that deal didn't get accepted. However, there is the context of the Champions League squad, which may be factored in. And there's also interest in Joe Willock as well. Maybe they're looking at trying to sell him on instead and keeping Longstaff for that reason. I don't know, but Leeds may not come back now because that was what was said, that they would move on to potential other targets. But I think that this deal can still be done if they do come back with another bid. I think Newcastle are accepting that they do have to trade, and he is a decent option to sell. Longstaff's willing to go, so Newcastle get a fee for him, which tells you everything you need to know about Sean Longstaff, the person. And yeah, I think that this one is not over yet, even though the bid has been rejected. Thanks so much for joining me on today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily. I'll be back tomorrow with another one. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Ekitike links. Cheers.